The next piece of reading that I will go into is comprehension. And really, comprehension can develop across any and all age. So even starting with little ones as young as 2. So comprehension involves developing an understanding of what is read, whether someone's listening to a story or they're reading it themselves. And this can involve areas like predicting, making inferences, understanding different vocabulary concepts, using context clues, identifying what we call story grammar components. So the characters, the setting, the problem, the conclusion of stories, responding to questions that they are hearing or seeing while they're reading. And we can use comprehension to help pair what is read with prior knowledge. So whether that's knowledge of our world or knowledge of other, things that have been read in the past. So some strategies to build comprehension at home, I would recommend actively pausing to ask questions while reading with your child. So something I try to include or teach to families is reading the words that are on the page and then pausing and coming up with your own questions. This helps to make the child, even if they're not reading it themselves, make them more of an active participant in the story time and helps them to really dive into and break down what's happening in the story. So if you're reading The Cat in the Hat, right, maybe you stop and ask, oh, like what's happening in this story? Who came in? Why is the cat feeling this way? You can also have your child define or describe new vocabulary words with rich features. So when I say rich features, I usually like to break down vocabulary concepts into different components like the object category, object function, what it looks like, where you might see it or where you might find it, some of the parts. What this does is help children to build a robust concept of the vocabulary that they are seeing or hearing, and this can help them to apply these skills when they're reading. So this can be as simple as something like a cow. When you're reading with a little one, you can have them break down the cow and say, okay, what category is cow? It's an animal. Where might you see a cow, right? You might see it on a farm. What does a cow look like? It has black and white spots, right? Maybe some of the parts are it has a tail or it has horns or it has an udder. It might give us milk, right? So now we are really building our little ones' knowledge of that word so that when they read it in a story, they have a really strong understanding of what that word is. As your children get older, you can start to do this with more complex vocabulary terms or more lower frequency terms. So as kids get into that elementary school age and older, you might start to do this with more abstract concepts. So tell me about what patriotism means, right? And you can still break it down in the same way. Okay, you can also help to build those prediction skills with your child by asking what might happen next before flipping the page. Again, working in that pause time and that really active participation in reading to help them start to build those inferencing and prediction skills. So if you're reading a book, it's as easy as pausing with them and asking, what do you think might happen next? What do you think is going to happen to Pooh on the next page, right? And seeing if they're able to come up with some ideas based on what they've read. To help with comprehension for older kids, if it's something that they're reading more independently, I like to recommend chunking longer stories to help maintain comprehension. Sometimes kids have a really hard time remembering details or pieces of information from longer stories, but if we break it down and do check-ins after each paragraph or each page or each chapter, it will help to reinforce some of those components that we're looking for, like new vocabulary or elements of the story or characters or details, right, before it gets too far away and they aren't able to remember that information. So you can use some of these strategies like pausing, asking questions, having them jot down some of the details before moving on. And then you can also have kids visualize elements in order to help recall details. Sometimes being able to make that like visual depiction in your head can help to tie in some details and help strengthen memory. Okay, and the last piece of skilled reading that I'm going to really dive into is what we consider narrative skills. Again, this is something that can be developed across all ages, starting as little as 2 or 3. So when we talk about narrative skills, that involves storytelling. So looking at sentence structure, general flow of a story, all of the story components. This is a really important piece for comprehension and creation of stories as well. So narrative skills involve what we call macro structure. So looking at those story grammar components like the setting, the characters, the resolution, kind of the big picture of what's going on and what we're reading or writing. And then it also involves what we call microstructure. So using specific details, knowledge of grammar components, using specific or complex sentence structures to help get your point across, kind of the mechanics of what's being read. So some strategies to help build narrative skills with your little one can start as simple as asking your child to retell events in their day. What this does is helps to really build or strengthen some of these skills of using those story grammar components. So if you ask them to tell you what happened at school, they're probably going to incorporate character, setting, situations, right? So I sat with Sarah at lunch and we ate a hot dog. And then after that, we went to recess and played on the swings. You can have them sequence events in books or even in daily routines. So what this does is helps to build those for one understanding of those sequencing terms. So first, next, then last. So the more that they hear that and use that, they'll build that knowledge base, but then it will help them to use and start to create those stories, right? When we have narratives, we really have that sequence of events or characters or details, and that's what makes narratives different than just a comment or a story or a sentence. If you are reading with your little ones, I would recommend highlighting story elements like character, setting, problem, solution while you're reading. So, again, if it's something like the Cat in the Hat, you can point out, oh, the characters in this book are the cat, thing one, thing two, the goldfish, right? The setting is the children's house, and just really walking them through what that is, and that will help build their awareness with what those story grammar components are. Reading, and I put reading in quotes, but reading wordless books or videos is a really great way to inspire narrative skills in your little one because there's no words for them to read, right? They get to be the ones to create the story. So I've done this before with silent videos on YouTube or even, like I said, wordless books, or even if there are books with words, you can have them try to create the story if they're not able to read those words yet. And this will, again, help them to really take ownership of those narrative skills, get some practice with piecing all of the macro structure components, so the characters, the setting, the plot, the details, in with the language that helps to communicate and tie the whole thing together. You can also narrate common routines using rich language. So something like bedtime, snack time, instead of keeping it short and say, okay, we're going to go to bed, you can really kind of flesh out what's going on to build more of a narrative around it. So it's bedtime. First, we're going to go to the bathroom and brush our teeth, and we're going to get our pajamas on. After that, we're going to read a bedtime story, and then we're going to turn off the lights because it's time to go to bed. Right? So having that more fleshed out language, we have some sequencing in there, we have more details, we have the setting of what's going on, right? That helps them to just have exposure to narratives in their daily routine, and they can help to make that connection between narratives and stories and narratives in day-to-day activities as well. And then you can develop creative narratives through play with your child too. So if you're playing any sort of pretend play activity like playing with a kitchen set or playing with action figures, you can help by modeling or creating some stories around the play activities as well.